disciples. But so he asked, how many disciples do you have? How many followers? And Prabhupada said, 100. And then the reporter asked him, well, where do you get your money? And it's like, that's what people always want to know. And because they're always suspicious, and they have good reason to be suspicious in the material world. When a lot of money starts coming to any project, especially including spiritual projects, well, where do you get your money from? And because the material world is such a crooked place, full of lying and cheating in Kali Yugas, and they're always wondering who's influencing you, or who's supporting you with money. And Prabhupada, he understood the mood of the questioner, not in a very bad way, but in kind of a critical, challenging way. Where do you get your money? And Prabhupada, he said, Krishna gives it to us. And the man was like, well, God doesn't write you a check. And in those days, people used checks or cash, almost always. And so he said, God doesn't write you a check. He's pretty skeptical. He doesn't think Krishna can handle a checkbook or have a hand to write a check with. But Prabhupada, and generally, that's not how Krishna sends the money. But Krishna definitely gives the money. And Prabhupada told him, he said, no, Krishna influences you in your heart to give donation, and you give it. And that's how Krishna consciousness goes on. Like in those days, like $100 donation was a lot of money, or $1,000, definitely a lot of money. And I remember one day after the Sunday feast here in like 1976, and the temple president found a check for $5,000 in the donation box, and it was by this man that nobody knew him, but he had been coming in sincerely to the temple for 2 or 3 or 4 years, I don't know, but nobody knew him. He was very quiet and stayed in the background. And so they saw his name on the check, and they found out who wrote the check, and then they talked to him, and he became great friends and supporters of the temple from then on. But he gave it because he was inspired by Prabhupada, by all the devotees in the temple, and he gave a $5,000 check from his business. Anyway, that's, if anybody challenges you, or if you think, if any devotee, if anyone thinks, well, where does all the money come from? And just tell them, or tell yourself that Krishna gives the money. Krishna gives the money. And Prabhupada emphasized that many times. So many times, Krishna is not a poor man. He can give. Nowadays, devotees around the world are spending millions and millions of dollars all the time. And but millions and millions of dollars is nothing for Krishna. There's no amount that's big for Krishna. Krishna owns everything. So that's where the money comes from. Krishna gives the money, inspires people, us. Now most of the devotees have jobs. In those days, hardly anybody had a job, any of the devotees. But now most of the devotees have jobs, and they give Lakshmi to the temple. They return Lakshmi to Lord Ram. And anyway, and so many other people, they give donations. So anyway, that's something I heard from Prabhupada in an interview just yesterday, I think. And I always recommend to people that not only listen to Prabhupada's lectures, the audio of Prabhupada's lectures, which of course are supremely important, but listen to Prabhupada in room conversations and morning walks and interviews with people. Listen to him in all kinds of settings, because you'll hear him speak in ways that you don't hear him speak in a class. In class, he's very official and very just Shastra, quoting verses and making strong philosophical points. And of course, he does the same thing in other settings too, but in a different way. You'll hear him emphasize things in slightly different ways, or hear him say things that you may not hear him say in a lecture. So I recommend listening. Everything's so easily available at a touch of click on a computer or touch on your cell phone. You can listen to anything you want. So I recommend that. Anyway, it's extremely valuable. So anyways, I just got to take a few seconds to remember where I was in this book we're reading it. Well, this is the first wedding. It was Mukunda, who is very elderly, but is Mukunda Maharaj. But he was one of the very early devotees. He's one of the devotees who helped Prabhupada get 26 Second Avenue. That was before any of the other Satsvarup Maharaj or Kirtananda or Brahmananda. He was even before them. And Prabhupada had other people helping him before that too, but Mukunda Prabhu Maharaj is really the only one from that previous time, before 26 Second Avenue, that became a serious follower, disciple. Okay, so this is just after the first initiation, which was on Janmashtami in 1966. And this is September 10th, 1966. The morning after the initiation, Prabhupada sat in his apartment reading from a commentary on the Srimad Bhagavatam. The large Sanskrit volume lay before him on his desk as he read. Prabhupada kept a volume of commentaries by, 10 or 12 of the previous acharyas with him that he referred to as he was writing his own purports. He wore horn-rimmed glasses which changed his demeanor, making him look extremely scholarly. He wore eyeglasses only for reading, and this added to the visual impression that he had now gone into a deep professorial meditation. The room was quiet, and brilliant mid-morning sunlight shone warmly through the window. Suddenly, someone knocked on the door, and Prabhupada was a supreme scholar, like all of you are scholars here. All of you are college men and women and very highly educated. Prabhupada his intelligence and scholarship were unmatched, is coming directly from Krishna. But anyway, his extreme, unbelievably intelligent. And if you listen to his audio lesson, read his books, you can see how just brilliant just plain brilliant he is, and how knowledgeable, to put it mildly, he is. He wasn't. There's no faking it or making things up or pulling things out of the air or anything like that. Everything was from the deepest wisdom and his deepest intelligence. Suddenly someone knocked on the door. Yes, come in. He looked up, removing his glasses as Mike and Jan, now Mukunda and Janaki, opened the door, peering in. He had asked to see them. Yes, come in. He smiled, then they walked in and closed the door behind them. Two vivacious young Americans. From his expressive eyes, he seemed to be amused. They sat down before him, and Prabhupada playfully addressed them by their new initiated names. So, you are living together, but now you have taken serious vows of initiation. So what will you do about it? Well, Mukunda seemed puzzled. Isn't there any love in Krishna consciousness? Swamiji nodded. Yes, so I am saying, why don't you get married? They agreed it was a good idea. And Prabhupada immediately scheduled a wedding date for 2 days later. And at that time, and today too, there were so many people who were just men and women who were just living together and having children sometimes, but just living together. And there was a saying, but not a saying, but a thing that people would say back then, young people, they'd say, well, what is marriage anyway? It's just a piece of paper. And we don't need to be married. We love each other. And so we live together. And no, but marriage is an official thing. It's taking of vows. And of course, in Kali Yuga, more and more, the vows are ignored and forgotten after a few months or a few years. And people separate very often. But the whole idea of marriage, it's a sacred commitment, a serious taking of vows. And it's like initiation. Initiation is not just an official thing. It's the most serious thing, even more serious than marriage, because initiation is birth after. He is my Lord, birth after birth, eternally, a spiritual master. So initiation is not just an official thing. And neither is marriage, and especially marriage in Krishna consciousness. It should be taken very seriously, scheduled. Anyway, they agreed it was a good idea, and Prabhupada immediately scheduled a wedding date for 2 days later. There's no big planning of reception and renting a hall and sending out a list of recommended gifts that people could buy, or spending hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of dollars on a wedding. Prabhupada immediately scheduled a wedding date for 2 days later. Swamiji said he would cook a big feast and hold the marriage ceremony in his apartment, and he asked Mukunda and Janaki to invite their relatives. Both Mukunda and Janaki had grown up in Oregon, on the other side of the country, 3,000 miles away, and their family members found it impossible to travel such a long distance on such short notice. Only Janaki's sister, Joan, agreed to come. This is Joan speaking. Little did I know what kind of wedding it would be. All I knew was that they had met a Swami and were taking Sanskrit from him, as well as attending his small storefront temple on 2nd Avenue. When I met the Swami, he was sitting beside the window in his front room, bathed in sunlight, surrounded by pots of prasadam, which he was distributing to the devotees who were sitting around him against the wall. I was a follower of macrobiotics and not so eager for taking this noonday meal. Macrobiotics was popular at that time, and it was just like real simple, basic, like brown rice and like almost raw vegetables, and just really, really basic, simple food. It was a popular fad that was going on at the time. So she was a follower of macrobiotics and not so eager for taking this noonday meal. When I entered the room, the Swami said, "Who is this?" And Mukunda said, "This is Janaki's sister, Joan. She has come from Oregon to attend the wedding." Swamiji said, "Oh, where is Oregon?" Mukunda said, "It's 3,000 miles away on the other side of the United States." And Swamiji asked, "Oh, coming from so far? Very nice. And when will the other members of the family arrive?" Then I said, "I'm the only one who's coming for the wedding, Swamiji." He said, "Never mind. It is very nice that you have come. Please sit down and take some Krishna prasadam." He offered me some dal, a rather moist sabji, yogurt, salad, and chapatis. But because I was a devotee of macrobiotics, all of this prasadam was very unpalatable to me. Practically speaking, it was sticking in my throat the whole time. But I remember looking over at the radiant and beautiful person who was so eager for me to take this prasadam that he had prepared. So I took it all, but in my mind I decided this would be the last time I would take this luncheon with the devotees. At any rate, somehow I finished the meal, and Swamiji, who had been looking over at me, said, "You want more? You want more?" And I said, "Oh, no, thank you. I'm so full. It was very nice, but I can't take any more." So finally the prasadam was finished, and they were all getting up to clean, and Swamiji commented that he wanted to see Mukunda, Janaki, and myself for making preparations for the wedding the next day. So when we were all there sitting in the room with him, the Swami reached over into the corner where there was a big pot with crystallized sugar syrup sticking to the outside. I thought, oh, this is supposed to be the pièce de résistance, but I can't possibly take any more. But he reached his hand into the pot anyway and pulled up a huge, round, dripping glubjaman. I said, "Oh no, I'm so full. I couldn't take any." And he said, "Oh, take, take." And he made me hold out my hand and take it. Well, by the time I finished the glubjaman, I was fully convinced that this would be the last time I would ever come there. Then he began explaining how in the Vedic tradition, the women's side of the family made lavish arrangements for the wedding. And since I was the only member of the family who had come to assist, I should come the next day and help him make the wedding feast. So the next morning at 9, while Janaki was decorating the room for the fire sacrifice, stringing leaves and flower garlands across the top of the room, I went upstairs to meet Swamiji. When I arrived, he immediately sent me out shopping with a list, 5 or 6 items to purchase. One of these items was not available anywhere in the markets, although I spoke to so many shopkeepers. When I came back, he asked me, "You have obtained all the items on the list?" And I said, "Well, everything except for one." He said, "What is that?" He said, "Well, no one knows what tumar is." Tumar. She thought that's what it was. He had me wash my hands, I assume it was turmeric. He had me wash my hands and sat me down in his front room on the floor with a 5-pound bag of flour, a pound of butter, and a pitcher of water. And he looked down at me and said, "Can you make a medium soft dough?" John is Jamuna. Yeah. So I'm assuming she was already a good cook. But like for a macrobiotic person, like butter and sugar were two things that they would be like, "Oh, we don't eat that. That's very bad." "Can you make a medium soft dough?" I replied, "Do you mean a pastry or pie crust or a short crust dough or pâte brisée dough? What kind of pastry do you want?" Obviously, she was a cook already. "How old are you?" he said. And I said, "I'm 25, Swamiji." "You are 25, he said, and you can't make a medium soft dough?" "It is a custom in India that any young girl from the age of 5 years is very experienced in making this dough. But never mind, I will show you." So he very deftly emptied a bag of flour and with his fingertips cut in the butter until the mixture had a consistency of coarse meal. Then he made a well in the center of the flour, poured in just the right amount of water, and very deftly and expertly kneaded it into a velvety smooth, medium soft dough. He then brought in a tray of cooked potatoes, mashed them with his fingertips, and began to sprinkle in spices. He showed me how to make and form potato kachoris, which are fried Indian pastries with spiced potato filling. From 11 until 5, 6 hours, I sat in this one room making potato kachoris. Meanwhile, in the course of the same afternoon, Swamiji brought in 15 other special vegetarian dishes, each one in a large enough quantity for 40 persons. 15 preps for 40 people each. And he had made them single-handedly in his small, narrow kitchen. And the kitchen was probably like 30 square feet or something like that. I'm sure it was a very small kitchen. He made 15 big preps. He made them. It was rather hot that afternoon, and I was perspiring. I asked Swamiji, "May I please have a glass of water?" He peeked his head around the door and said, "Go wash your hands." I immediately did so, and when I returned, Swamiji had a glass of water for me. He explained to me that while preparing this food for offering to the Supreme Lord, one should not think of eating or drinking anything. So after drinking the glass of water, I went in and washed my hands and sat down. Because in America, people, they want a glass of water while they're cooking, they just get a glass and drink it. And while cooking, you just taste the things as you're cooking to see if they're coming out right. That's the normal thing to do. But of course, Swamiji didn't want that. Krishna doesn't want that. And I went in and washed my hands and sat down. About 2 PM, I said, "Swamiji, may I have a cigarette?" And he peeked his head around the corner and said, "Go wash your hands." So I did. And when I came back, he explained to me the 4 rules of Krishna consciousness. I continued to make the kachoris, and around 3:30, 4 o'clock, it was extremely warm in the room, and as Swamiji was bringing in one of his preparations, I was wiping my arm and hand across my forehead. My forehead was sweating. He looked down at me and said, "Please go and wash your hands." Again, I did so, and upon returning, he had a moistened paper towel for me. He explained that cooking for Krishna required certain standards of cleanliness and purity that were different than the ones I was accustomed to. About 30 people attended. The decorations were similar to the ones for the initiation a few days before, except that they were more festive and the feast was more lavish. Swamiji's front room was decorated with pine boughs, and leaves and flowers were strung overhead from one side of the room to the other. Some of the new initiates came, their large red beads around their necks. They had taken vows now, 16 rounds a day, and they chanted on their beads just as Swamiji had shown them, and they happily, though self-consciously, called one another by their new spiritual names. Janaki speaking, Swamiji said that I should wear a sari at my wedding, and he said it should be made of silk. I asked him what color, and he said red. So Mukunda bought me an absolutely elegant sari and some very nice jewelry. The Swami's friends were used to seeing Janaki, as she always came with Mukunda, but usually she wore no makeup and dressed in very plain clothes. They were astounded and somewhat embarrassed to see her enter wearing jewelry, makeup, and a bright red sari. The bride's hair was up and braided, decorated with an oval silver filigree hair ornament. She wore heavy silver earrings, which Mukunda had purchased from an expensive Indian import shop on Fifth Avenue, and silver bracelets. Prabhupada directed Mukunda and Janaki to sit opposite him Mukunda was a professional musician, and obviously he had some Lakshmi, bought some expensive stuff. Prabhupada directed Mukunda and Janaki to, most of the devotees had nothing or practically nothing. He had something. Prabhupada directed Mukunda and Janaki to sit opposite him on the other side of the sacrificial fire arena. And just as at the initiation, he lit the incense and instructed them in the purification by water, recited the purification mantra, and then began to speak. He explained about the relationship between man and wife in Krishna consciousness and how they should serve each other and how they should serve Krishna. Prabhupada then asked Janaki's sister to present her formally to Mukunda as his wife. Mukunda then repeated after Swamiji, I accept Janaki as my wife, and I shall take charge of her throughout both our lives. We shall live together peacefully in Krishna consciousness, and there will never be any separation. And then Prabhupada turned to Janaki. Will you accept Sriman Mukunda Das Brahmachari as your life's companion? Will you serve him always and help him to execute his Krishna conscious activities? And then Janaki replied, yes, I accept Mukunda as my husband throughout my life. There shall never be any separation between us, either in happiness or distress. I shall serve him always, and we shall live together peacefully in Krishna consciousness. Anyway, that's Prabhupada explained that's the essence of marriage in Krishna consciousness. There's some sense gratification there, of course, and but the basic thing is that you live together and you serve Krishna together, serve spiritual master. Of course, back then Prabhupada was the only spiritual master, and now sometimes husband and wife have different spiritual masters. But that's normal also, and but the essence of marriage is that you work together to help each other, to preach Krishna consciousness, help each other serve Krishna. And you know that you're both people and the children too are stuck in the material world for millions of births and deaths, and this is our opportunity for going back home, back to Godhead. So you do that as a brahmachari or a grihastha, vanaprastha or sannyasi. And but the essence, marriage is meant for working together to help each other, to serve Krishna, Guru and Krishna, and go back home, back to Godhead. And yeah, and that's the essence of all our relationships in Krishna consciousness: husband and wife, friend and friend, in the temple, or guru and disciple. The essence of all relationships in Krishna consciousness is just to help each other, work together, to help each other go back home, back to Godhead. That's the purpose of everything in Krishna consciousness, and everything in Krishna consciousness is centered around our individual progress, but our individual progress is inevitably intertwined with the progress of all the devotees in the temple, in the movement. So we help each other, we work together to go back to please Krishna and go back to Godhead. And that's definitely true in marriage also. No one knew anything about of what was going on except Swamiji. He led the chanting, he gave the lines for the bride and groom to exchange. He told them where to sit and what to do. He, in fact, had told them to get married. He had also cooked the elaborate feast that was waiting in the kitchen for the completion of the ceremony. Prabhupada asked Mukunda and Janaki to exchange their flower garlands, and after that to exchange sitting places. He then asked Mukunda to rub some vermilion down the part in Janaki's hair, and then to cover her head with her sari. Next came the fire sacrifice, and finally the feast. The special feature of the wedding was the big feast. And everything in Krishna consciousness ends in a big feast, which is that Krishna consciousness is, the prasadam is so delicious and the props are so good, and it's a Krishna consciousness is a very joyful celebration every day. Like after class, we'll go upstairs and have a big, not a big feast, a simple feast, but it'll be very delicious and everybody will like it, be happy. The special feature of the wedding was the big feast. It turned out to be quite a social success. The guests ate enthusiastically, asked for more, and raved about the sensational tastes. Prabhupada's followers, who were accustomed to the simple daily fare of rice, dal, sabji, and chapatis, found the feast intoxicating and ate as much as they could get. And of course, they were all young and healthy, and they could eat a lot. And they did eat a lot. Mukunda's friends were macrobiotic followers, and at first they fastidiously avoided all the sweets. But gradually the enthusiasm of the others wore down their resistance, and they became captivated by the Swami's expert cooking. God, he's a good cook, said Janaki. Bruce, who had missed that Brahmananda, not quite yet, who had missed the first initiation, was seeing the Vedic fire sacrifice and tasting the Swami's kachuris for the first time. He resolved on the spot to dedicate himself to Krishna consciousness and become one of the Swamiji's disciples as soon as possible. Almost all the visitors personally approached Swamiji to thank him and congratulate him. He was happy and said it was all Krishna's blessings, Krishna's grace. After the ceremony, Mukunda and his wife entertained many of the devotees and guests in their apartment. The evening had put everyone in high spirits, and Hayagriva was reciting poetry. Then someone turned on the television to catch the scheduled interview with Allen Ginsberg, the poet, and much to everyone's happiness, Allen began playing harmonium and chanting Hare Krishna. He even said there was a Swami on the Lower East Side who was teaching this mantra yoga. Krishna consciousness was new and unheard of, yet now the devotees were seeing a famous celebrity perform kirtan on television. The whole evening seemed auspicious. Back at his apartment, Prabhupada, along with a few helpers, cleaned up after the ceremony. He was satisfied. He was introducing some of the major elements of his Krishna consciousness mission. He had initiated disciples, he had married them, and he had feasted the public with Krishna prasadam. If I had the means, he told his followers, I could hold a major festival like this every day. And that's Krishna consciousness is a festival every day. You go to Krishna Loka or in Lord Chaitanya's presence in Navadvip or in Jagannath Puri, every day is a festival in Krishna consciousness. A festival means people are happy. And if you're with Krishna, if you're with Lord Chaitanya, if you're with Swamiji, if you're in the temple, devotees are happy. Prabhupada said that we're turning hippies into happies. And Krishna, there's no happiness in the material world. There's a tiny bit of happiness. We have, all the conditioned souls have an idea what happiness is. Otherwise, everyone has some idea what happiness is, what love is, what peace is. There's some idea of these things, but it's very, very small. But in Krishna consciousness, especially for the very purified, pure devotees, there's only happiness, there's unlimited happiness. All right, so let's stop there. Anything, questions or comments? Okay, all glories to Srila Prabhupada. Jai. It's in a kitchen about this size.